Hello, dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Okays, let's start our video. The kitchen smelled faintly of reheated leftovers, and the hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence between mother, father, and child. Sitting at the worn wooden table, the young adult hesitated before finally asking for help. Just a small loan to get through the month. Nothing extravagant, just enough to keep the lights on and avoid late fees. The request hung in the air like a heavy weight, waiting for mercy, or at least quiet understanding. Instead, the reply was sharp and final, slicing through the moment like broken glass. "We're not your bank anymore," Mom snapped, her eyes cold with a strange kind of satisfaction. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, as if her words were the final verdict. The sting of rejection burned instantly, deeper than expected. It wasn't just about money. It was about what those words carried, the denial of support, the withdrawal of safety, the suggestion that needing help was somehow shameful. The room seemed to shrink as the statement echoed. The father shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, his silence an invisible agreement. The air turned thick with judgment, as though the child had crossed a line simply by asking. The heartbeat quickened, breath caught, and the awareness settled in. This was no longer a home where one could turn for help. This was a courtroom, and the verdict was already written. The bills stacked up quickly: electricity, rent, the credit card that seemed to multiply its balance no matter how carefully payments were made. Each envelope carried a reminder that life did not pause for wounded pride. Days blurred into long shifts at a job that paid too little, followed by nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how long survival could be stretched. Attempts at finding something better brought little relief. Resumes disappeared into digital voids. Interviews ended with polite smiles but no offers. At the bank, the loan officer looked at the credit score and shook his head with practiced sympathy. Walking out, the protagonist felt small, the rejection heavier because there was no family safety net to fall back on. Anger simmered beneath the surface. Anger at a mother's cold words, at a father's silence. But the resentment was tucked away, hidden under forced smiles whenever coworkers asked how things were going. Pride became a mask, even as doubt whispered at night. In the fog of desperation, shortcuts began to sparkle like mirages. Ads promising quick returns from online schemes tempted restless nights. An old acquaintance suggested an investment opportunity that required just a little upfront cash, promising to double it in weeks. The thought of lying on applications or stretching the truth about income crossed the mind more than once. One evening, giving in to a reckless impulse, the protagonist handed over money to the too-slick acquaintance, hoping this would be the break that turned things around. Weeks later, the acquaintance vanished, phone disconnected, social media gone. Shame hit harder than the financial loss, a bitter reminder of vulnerability. Standing in the empty apartment, staring at the dwindling balance in the account, the weight of foolishness pressed down. The easy way out had only dug the hole deeper. But not everyone vanished. A co-worker, quiet but observant, noticed the fatigue etched in late arrivals and distracted stares. Over coffee in the break room, the conversation shifted from casual chatter to something gentler, more genuine. The co-worker didn't offer cash, but instead shared hard-earned wisdom. Budgeting tricks, time management, the importance of building slowly rather than chasing illusions. Another mentor figure, a former teacher met by chance, reminded the protagonist that failure didn't define a person, only their next step did. These voices didn't fix everything overnight, but they planted seeds. For the first time in months, advice felt less like criticism and more like direction. The protagonist began to realize that asking for help didn't always mean begging for money. Sometimes, it meant accepting guidance. Little by little, the storm began to shift. A part-time gig delivering food turned into a reliable side hustle. The hours were long, but the immediate income gave a strange sense of control. Budgeting apps became a daily tool, cutting out unnecessary luxuries like streaming subscriptions and late-night takeout. Even small victories, a week with bills paid on time, an account that didn't dip into overdraft, sparked a cautious pride. Standing in the cramped apartment after balancing the month's expenses, the protagonist felt a flicker of something new, something empowering. For the first time since that night at the kitchen table, a thought surfaced clearly. Maybe I don't need them after all. It happened suddenly, like a storm breaking without warning. The phone rang one evening, the mother's voice tight with panic rather than authority. The father had lost his job after decades of steady work, his company downsizing without remorse. Bills were piling up faster than they could manage, and the savings they had once flaunted were now drained by unexpected expenses. To make matters worse, a sibling, long thought to be the successful one, had fallen victim to a scam, pouring money into a fraudulent investment that left the family on the edge of collapse. The irony was bitter and almost cruel. The very people who had turned their backs now came forward with desperation in their voices. The words were hesitant, almost swallowed by pride, but the message was clear. They needed help. The request rattled around inside, stirring memories like dust in sunlight. That night at the kitchen table replayed in sharp detail. We're not your bank anymore. The sting of humiliation felt fresh again, and the temptation to spit the words back was nearly overwhelming. Pride surged, whispering that this was the chance to even the score, to show them how it felt to be abandoned. Yet compassion pressed back with equal strength. Family, flawed as they were, still held threads of connection. The struggle became an internal tug-of-war, vengeance versus forgiveness, independence versus belonging. The thought of refusing flickered with satisfaction, but the image of their frightened, weary faces made the decision less simple. Could turning away truly bring peace, or would it only build another wall of resentment, higher than before? In the end, the choice came quietly but firmly. The protagonist didn't hand over stacks of money or bend under pressure. Instead, help was offered on new terms, a carefully structured loan with boundaries, advice on budgeting, and introductions to contacts who could guide the father toward new work opportunities. There was no smugness, no condescension, just clarity. This was not dependency. It was a decision born of strength, not weakness. For the first time, the balance of power shifted. The child who once begged at the table now stood as someone who could choose when and how to give. The act wasn't about repayment or revenge. It was proof that growth had taken root where rejection once lived. They gathered in the living room, the same space where sharp words had once been exchanged like weapons. This time, the air was heavy but not hostile. The protagonist spoke first, voice steady, but carrying the weight of months of silence. Every word was deliberate, about the night they were cut off, the humiliation of being dismissed as a burden, the loneliness of carrying debt and doubt without even a kind word from home. The parents listened, the mother's arms folded at first in defensiveness, the father's gaze fixed on the floor. Slowly, though, the truth sank in. Their decision, meant to push away, had forced growth, but at a painful cost. The silence that followed was thick with recognition. The mother's eyes softened, the father finally lifted his head, and though no grand apology came, there was a quiet acknowledgement, a nod that carried more weight than words. Later, alone, the protagonist turned the moments over in their mind. Bitterness might have lingered, but something unexpected rose instead. Gratitude for the struggle that had carved resilience out of fragility. They cut me off, but that gave me strength, echoed as both truth and revelation. Independence had never meant rejecting family entirely. It meant standing tall enough to face the world, with or without their backing. What once felt like abandonment now looked like a turning point, painful but necessary. The relationship with family would never be the same. It couldn't, but it didn't have to be broken either. As the night settled in, the protagonist imagined a future not built on dependency, nor on revenge, but on choice. The closing thought was quiet but resolute. There could be love here still, reshaped, tested, and far from perfect, yet strong enough to begin again. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel Awesome Visual Story.